All right, so we're Exodus chapter 15 this morning in our message. I've got my Bible printed out, so I'm going to put it over here. I will start off with a question. Do you have a survival kit? Does anyone have a survival kit? Let's do show of hands if you're allowed to do that in this church. Yeah, cool. About 3 of us have got a survival kit. Wow, sorry that you raised your hands, because I'd like to know, how long will your survival kit last? Can anyone yell out? How long do you think it would last in an emergency?
3 days.
3 days. Thank you. That's good. How much water do you have in that survival kit? None. Well, you're going to go to the big bowl just down the road to fill up. How much food do you have in your survival kit? 2 days worth of food? What kind of food? That's getting a bit personal, isn't it? So I've got a survival kit at home of essentials. So I've got chocolate and I've got biscuits in there. And I restock it every week, if you know what I mean. A bit more of a serious question for all of us. Do you have a spiritual survival kit? And if you've got a spiritual survival kit, what is in your survival kit? And when things start running dry or natural or unnatural disasters start happening, how long until that stuff needs replenishing? How long till it runs out? We're going to check in with Exodus chapter 15. So we're following a guy by the name of Moses. Moses is a famous character in the Bible. We're looking particularly at how Moses interacted with people and Moses interacted with God and how God interacted with people. So that's kind of like a triangle as you think about it. And it's fascinating because we love God. We come every Sunday to learn more about God, learn more about people and our relationship with God and others. So I think there's a lot that we can get out of here if we can get some help from the Lord. So we're going to start our Exodus chapter 15, and they're going to go into the desert of Shur. And on my corniness, and because I knew Andy was on the data projector for the first time ever, thank you Andy today, I've put some corny catchphrases in there. So complaints department, next slide, we're going to the desert of Shur. And oh goodness, that didn't work. Do you know how to go back and launch PowerPoint? That's right, it's going to come. We'll go back again. Anyway, the first word in Exodus chapter 15, if you've got a Bible in front of you, if you've got a phone in front of you with your Bible app, you would see the word then. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea and went into the desert of Shur. So what does then mean? What's that about? What's that hooking on? What's then? What's it's after? Well, it's after they were in the Red Sea. In Exodus chapter 15 at the start, you'd read these words, that Moses and the Israelites, after they were rescued by God, crossing through the Red Sea. Now, even if you haven't grown up in church, you might know what that reference is. It's God parting the waters of the Red Sea, opening it up for the Israelites, and then as the Egyptians came through, God said, no, this is just for the Israelites, and so he closed it up again. And it saved the slave nation from slavery, and he got them out to escape. Now they're on a journey from Egypt to Israel. And at the end of crossing the Red Sea, they stopped and wanted to praise God, similar to what we did this morning. But look who's praising. It's Moses and the Israelites, and they sung this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, both horse and driver he is hurled into the sea. Verse 2, the Lord is my strength and my defense. Similar to what we're singing this morning, isn't it? He has become my salvation. He is my God. I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will exalt him. So here's this praise and this declaration of trust as they go out. But the thing is, they're going out to where? Moses led them out from the Red Sea and they went into the desert of Shur. So they're going into the desert. I don't know if you've been in a desert before. I'm trying to have a good tone on the Israelites because they're going to do not some smart things which this generation seems to do, but it helps to remember what they're facing. I've never been in the desert before of any great length. Desert road doesn't really count, especially when you're in a car. They're going for 3 days without finding water. I don't know what they would feel like. 3 days without finding water. Parched, dry, and desperate. And then they finally see over on the horizon, if you're reading verse 23, they're seeing water. And they go, is that a mirage? And they go, no, it's not a mirage. It's real, actual water. And so they come in close and they start getting in close and they start slurping up that water. As they're slurping, they start spitting it out one by one. Oh, gross. We can't drink this. It's bitter, obviously poisonous. The Hebrew word for bitter is Mara. It's what Naomi called herself, if you remember, when she went back to her family in Bethlehem. She said, don't call me Naomi, blessed, call me Mara, bitter. Bitter is a symbol of what the Israelites were getting like inside. They were bitter and broken inside, and they needed fixing. So the people grumbled, verse 24, against Moses. Now, I've underlined in my notes how many times it says grumbled or complained or whatever, but there's a lot of grumbling and complaining. We skipped through the slide before about the complaints department, but there's a lot of complaining going on. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we to drink? Here we are in the desert 3 days next to water, but we can't even drink it. What do we do? We're at our wits' end. And then Moses cried out to God, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it in the water, and the water became fit to drink. What we're hoping to see here is that Moses will do the same thing with the Israelites, that they'll go from bitterness to fit for faith. And what we're hoping in our lives is that we go from bitterness, because all of us experience bitterness from time to time, if we're honest, from bitterness to great faith in God. For us, it takes a little bit longer than this huge body of water that they managed to drink out of. But here they are in the desert without water. They seem to be saying to Moses, do you know what? We're going to die out here, aren't we? You're going to lead us to death. They're going to say it in 3 different ways, 3 different times, but they're saying, what are we going to drink? How are we going to live? We're going to seem to die out here. They forget the promises of God that he brought them out of Egypt. They forget the promise to Abraham to make them into a great nation. And they're saying, we're going to die out here. And then they complain to Moses instead of going straight to God. I love what Moses did in verse 25. He cried out to the Lord. Man, when I read that a few weeks ago, it really spoke powerfully to me. Have I, Andy, even asked God to interact with my concern or my burden? Go into difficult situations or work through difficult things, and they come out wrong, and you go, man, did I even approach God and say, this is tricky? Can you help? Can you help? I'll put a challenge for you. They're thirsting for water, but we need to thirst for God's interaction. Hey, the God of the universe, the powerful God of the universe, we need to thirst for him. And I love the way God responded. Instant. Look, piece of wood, weird, but anyway, here's a piece of wood, throw it in the water, and the water becomes quick to drink. Then the Lord says, look, I'm going to put you to the test. The Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them, putting them to the test. He said, this is conditional, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, and if you pay attention to his commands and keep his decrees, then, implied, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So what's he saying? The Lord's saying to Moses and the Israelites, you need to listen, you need to do right, you need to pay attention and keep all of my decrees, all of my things. Then I'm not going to bring on you those diseases that happened to the Egyptians. Do you remember the diseases? The plague of gnats, the plague of blood, the plague of the hailstones, the plague of death, all those different things that happened, the plague of the locusts, all those things. God's saying to the people, if you do what I say, then disaster won't come on you. The opposite of that is implied, isn't it? If you walk away, things are going to get hard. Things are going to get hard. Come down to verse 27. Then they came to Elim, which means palms, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. I love that little sentence. I don't know what it's in there for except for giving the historical journey, but they're not even asking for water there. They haven't necessarily changed their attitude, but God's just saying, look, here's 12 springs and 70 palms in the desert. Just incredible. Water is a huge issue for them. Huge issue for them. and it's going to come up again. I don't know, just while we're on it, if you know the rainfall of Egypt, or of in particular Cairo, the rainfall of Topol as well. I don't know if you know the difference. So the rainfall of Egypt in Cairo per year is 18 millimetres. So if I squash my fingertips together like that, that's about 18 millimetres, just like that. Yeah, grab a seat, Brendan. 18 millimetres is their annual rainfall in Cairo. So in Topol, what's our annual rainfall? Well, we had more than 18 millimetres last week. We get 1.1 metres, so that's my belly button height. I measured it this morning on my belly button. 1.1 metres we get in Topol. Laura and I were raised in Upper Hutt. I'd like to say grew up in Upper Hutt. One of us grew up in Upper Hutt, the other one's still growing up. They get that's me, if you're wondering. They get 1.5 millimetres of water every year, so they're up to their neck in it in Upper Hutt compared to what we get here, which is interesting. Milford Sound, anyone want to guess? Yeah, 6 point something. So from this down here to the very pinnacle of the roof, that's their annual rainfall. Amazing. But Cairo gets this, and they're leaving Cairo. Well, they're probably leaving Lower Egypt than that. And they're going out from the water of Cairo to the desert. So this is a serious situation, and they're only going to get through if God miraculously interacts. Only if God's. That's why we call it the desert of Shur. We sure are thirsty. Let's go into the desert of sin. My next corny line. Because there's a single source of food. It's not called the desert of sin because they sinned there, even though they did. But it's I'm calling it the single source of food, desert of sin. So let's have a look. Chapter 16 of Exodus. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of sin, which has been between Elim and Sinai. What was Elim? It's the place of the 12 springs. So they're going from a place of provision into a place of difficulty again. A month basically after they'd come out of Egypt, in the desert, verse 2, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So see here, they've added the name Aaron to the name Moses. Aaron was Moses' right-hand man, and they're complaining against them. What are they complaining about? Lack of thirst? No, they've probably learnt their lesson and filled their water stuff up, and it will probably last a little bit longer. They're talking about a lack of chocolate biscuits, a lack of food. The Israelites had said to them, here comes the complaint, the specific complaint. We're going to pull this apart a little bit. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. Did you catch that? If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. That would be our wish. That would be better than what we're experiencing. It gets more. There we sat round pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve the entire assembly to death. Listen to what's going on, because it can speak into when we complain. First of all, they're exaggerating the complaint. We used to sit around pots of meat and eat all the food that we wanted. Well, they were slaves in Egypt. They may have, but it's not very likely that they sat around doing nothing, just looking at this pot of meat going, oh, might have a watch of this cook, and then I'm going to eat some, and then I'm going to sit around, and then I'm going to eat some. They were out working, overworked. But they probably had a variety of food that they wanted, and it was better than what they had in the desert. But they exaggerated. The other exaggeration, they said, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. So by the plagues and different things. Well, they're not wanting to die now from lack of food. They didn't want to die before from lack of water. Why would they want to die even earlier in Egypt? By the Lord's hand. They're just exaggerating the situation. When we're complaining, let's just be careful. Let's not exaggerate the situation. Also, when they're saying, if only we had died by the Lord's hand of Egypt, they're painting themselves in glory. They're painting themselves as the hero of the story. We would be happy to die by the Lord's hand in Egypt, just not here. Careful as you complain not to paint yourself in glory. Finally, careful what you're doing with the person you're complaining about. What's he saying about Moses? The reason you brought us out here was for the purpose of killing us. Look, they're talking to Moses and Aaron. You have brought us out into this desert. Why? To starve the entire assembly to death. Well, do they really think that? Any of those things are true? But it's quite often happens in our complaints, maybe not to that extent, but we start spiraling in our mind. I'm doing the double finger, spiraling in our mind and out of control, and we complain, and it gets exaggerated. We paint ourselves in glory, and we vilify the complainee. For them, it was a lack of faith and trust in God, not a good reason to complain. To ask, absolutely. Go back to our first step. Have we asked? Have we asked for food? But here again, they're saying to Moses, we're going to die out here, aren't we? This is going to be the end of the whole nation of Israel out here. They could have checked back on Jacob as he was taken off to a foreign land, was mistreated for 14 years, but came back to Israel again. They could check on anything. God's going to provide. God provides. God provides. When we complain about what we don't get what we want, or when we don't get what we want, sometimes we're complaining about God's provision. We want this in our life and it hasn't come because God hasn't necessarily provided it. Be careful. When you complain, your complaint goes beyond the person you're complaining about and actually to God. And as you would read down, you'll see again that God is saying, hey, I'm testing people. But God says, when you're grumbling against Moses, you're actually grumbling against me. Down in the bottom of verse 8, he has heard your grumbling against him. This is Moses speaking. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord, because it's the Lord who wasn't providing the food for him. But here we go. They're going to have a test. Verse 4, how's God going to respond? The Lord says to Moses, I will rain down bread for you. The people are going to go out each day and gather enough that day. In this way, I will test them to see whether they follow my instructions. What is the test? We've sat tests before, we like tests. The test is to see if they can pass or to help them upskill so that they can pass. There's a different test coming up, but these ones from God to the Israelites are the test to train them to pass, to see if they will obey. Because if they can't obey and trust God in this situation, they're never going to get into the land of Israel, because that's going to be really difficult for them. And if you've read a bit of the Bible before, you might know how it goes for them. They need to be trained and tested in lots of ways so that they've got full faith in God so that they can go into the land. That's why God's testing them. And I wonder sometimes, does God test us because he's training us for something that's coming? Does God put us through some tough times now because he's training us for something that is coming? On verse 5, on the sixth day they're to prepare what they bring in, and that's to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. That's because the sixth day was supposed to be enough food for the seventh. They kept complaining. I'm going to fast forward. Quail came in. Verse 15, halfway through verse 15 of chapter 16, Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord commanded. Here's the instructions that they needed to obey to pass the test. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an Omer for each person you have in your tent. So the Israelites did what they were told. Some gathered much, some gathered little. When they measured it by the Omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much. The one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. So it won't last if you keep it to the next day. Some of them didn't pay attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. So verse 21, it's a fascinating picture that's going on here, because this picture is not just for the next day, it's for the next day, it's for the next day, it's for the next day. It's ongoing provision of this bread raining from heaven. We'll get on to what the bread looked like in a little bit. Each morning, verse 21, everyone gathered as much as they needed. When the sun grew hot, it melted away. So here's the stuff. We haven't heard exactly what it is yet, but it rains down from heaven every night. In the morning, it's on the ground. They go out and they collect. They can only collect what they can eat for the day, except for on the sixth day, then they have to gather 2 days' worth. It's quite incredible. They don't have to walk on the sticky food later on in the day because the sun melts it away. It's an incredible, incredible substance. It reminds me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm guessing most of us are aware of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but they go in and there's that chocolate room, and every single thing you touch you can eat. Well, here they go, they leave their tent, and outside they're walking on food. Absolutely phenomenally incredible. God is providing. Let's skip down and look at what that food is. Verse 31, it's superfood. The people of Israel called the bread manna. The Hebrew word for what is man, and so they just extended that to manna, which means what is it? So we don't know what this stuff is. We've not come across it before in any of our history learnings. We've not come across it before in Egypt. It's the only time ever in the history of the world the existence of manna. What was it like? Well, it was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like wafers made with honey. So it sounds pretty good for a one-off meal or two. Maybe not for the length of time that they had it for. Then there's another sentence that I want to catch. Verse 32, Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna," so that's the amount that one person would eat in a day, "and keep it for the generations to come, so that they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt," because this bread isn't going to last. But you know what? That one omer is going to last for generations and generations. God is incredible. He can step into any situation. He can do anything with this manna bread. He's going to provide that bread for 40 years to that one generation. That one generation, I don't want to be too much of a spoiler, don't turn out to be too good. But God's going to provide them food every single day, better than He's ever provided you and me food for. We have to work a lot harder for our food than just stepping out the side and picking it up off the grass. I want to pick up a theme that's going to come back and again in a couple of weeks as well before we move on from this section. Verse 22, they're talking about the seventh day, the sixth and seventh day. I just want to pause on that for a minute. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord." So there's two pictures when they're using the word Sabbath there. They're saying you're resting and you're worshipping, or it's for the Lord. So this is what you want you to do. Bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. So they saved it till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you're to gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, some people went out on the seventh day and found nothing. But anyway, you'll find this idea of Sabbath rest, and I just want to talk a little bit as pastor here of Church at 109, the Sabbath rest repeating in the Bible a lot. You'll find it in the Old Testament at the start when God created the world in 6 days. On the seventh day he rested. You'll find it all through Moses' writings. Rest on the seventh day, rest on the seventh day. You'll find it in Jesus' time when Jesus rested on the seventh day most of the time. You'll find it you'll find it all through the Bible. They rested, they rested, they rested. One thing that I observe in people, not just in church, but out in the community, I was chatting to a good friend this week about just being so busy, is that we live busy lives. That there's pressure on us all the time. We've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, we've got to get through this, we've got to work through this. And we think that for some reason, if we work on 7 days a week, then we can get more done. But God has created human beings to take a break. Not just week cycles, but for the Israelites, worship cycles where they'd take a week off also. Our governments historically have put in us time for a break. But it's changing a bit at the moment. They used to say, Sunday was a day for no trading. Saturday was only Saturday morning. That was when I was a wee nipper. I don't know what it was for some of you other guys. God has created us to rest. And it's an act of worship and an act of faith to say, do you know what? I'm not going to go slam out all those things today. I'm not going to go and work on that today. I'm taking a day off. I'm taking a day off. And if you're saying, I've talked to many fine Bible teachers that even say, look, I just can't take a day off. And the answer back to that is, look, if you can't take a day off, take a couple of hours off. Turn your phone off, chuck it in the freezer. Just switch off and go, do you know what? No one's going to call me in this next couple of hours. I'm taking a rest. And while you're resting, think about filling your survival kit. Do some praying to God. Do some reading of God. Do some worship of God. Take a rest. It'll come up again in a couple of weeks' time and we'll get back to it. But anyway, let's get back to these people who are needing the single source of food, and they're complaining. But God's providing. I want to ask a couple of questions just as we finish this section, so they're coming up now. So what good things has God supplied with you today? Maybe you could do that in your time off. God, what have you already given me today? And then say, Lord, how are you trying to strengthen me through some tricky times? I want to recognize your hand or your potential hand. If we focus on God and His supplies, it'll take away our need to be bitter. All right, let's move in. We've got one more location to go. It's chapter 17. Chapter 17, verse 1. This place called Rephidim. And I just extended this out. Reaping a dim view of God. They're going to get what they have a dim view of God, and they're going to get the reaping from that. So the whole Israelite, chapter 17, verse 1, whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. Who's leading them through the desert? Who's leading them through the tough times? It's the Lord. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" Two things going on there. Moses is saying, you're not quarreling with me, you're quarreling with the Lord. And what are you doing with the Lord? You're putting him to the test. The test there that they're putting the Lord to is different than what the test that the Lord put them to. We'll come back to that. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" So three things. You're going to make us die of thirst, you're going to make our children die of thirst, and our livestock die of thirst. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They were almost ready to stone me." There's only one person at risk in this desert of losing their life, and that's Moses, about to be stoned. The people aren't at risk if they trust in God. Going back a month ago, for them, he got every man, woman, and child out of Egypt, along with all of their possessions, along with all of their animals, along with all of their Egyptian neighbours' gold and jewellery. And God even opened the sea for them a few weeks earlier, so that they walked through on dry land as they looked at the walls of water beside them. Phenomenal. And as they turned around to look back, the sea covered over, and it stopped the Egyptians from chasing them. Greatest army in the world at that time. Would have been absolute slaughter if they'd caught up with them, but God stopped it. They'd got a permanent food source that would last for 40 years. And they'd got water when they cried out. But now things were getting tight again. And they were going, it looks like our tank's running out. It looks like we're going to die. Are we going to die out here? It's looking like that. That had the promise of the whole new land given to them. Through Moses, God had said, I'm going to lead you to this whole new land. Their crisis is not a crisis of food. It's not a crisis of water. It's a crisis of faith. We don't trust that God is going to look after my needs in this situation. And man, if you're anything like me, I face crisis